for it and gave the United States money. And, he wanted to involve his nation of Libya into the war against terror because he didn't like the radicalization of Islam within his territory of North Africa and was urging everyone to get on the same page. So, he did so many movements to contain what has gotten out of control now, right? Back then. So would you speak to your personal experience with Gaddafi to my audience?
Well, I admired him as well, and while a lot of jokes swirled all over the place about him because he was an eccentric to say the least. He required camel's milk over and against any other form of milk. Because he was proud of his Bedouin history, which a lot of people in Libya itself laughed at. The Bedouins were, and to this day are considered kind of, ignorant peasants relative to the educated northern Libyans. Quite apart from any factions and distinctions between the Tamazight, the Amazigh people, who are the Berbers and the Arabs and so forth, which runs deep. It still exists there, and Gaddafi had a handle on that, and he tried to soothe these distinctions with this Bedouin identity and his way of proudly professing a Bedouin mentality, which is more boundless, desert related and so on in terms of consciousness. And it really got to that level in Libya under his rule. He was a character, a mad genius, some would say. I wouldn't go that far, but an interesting person who, for example, who took a really, really special interest in Islam in the Americas before Columbus. And that's what brought me to him and to Libya. The funding by what's called Jamiat al-Dawa Islamiyah, which was itself founded in Libya and served 72 countries. And this is the bringing to the world the word of Islam and the history of Islam and the academic and scientific side of Islam, and he thought himself to be the real leader of bringing to the world the word and the knowledge of Islam as it had spread from Muhammad on through to North Africa, to Africa, how it swept across Africa, and on that point, what are we really talking about in terms of the complexion of the identities of North Africa? We're talking about a later sweep of Arabs across Berber nations, across the Berber people who fled into the mountains, the Atlas Mountains, when the Arabs arrived. Gaddafi fancied himself an Arab, but a Bedouin Arab, and so anyway, with that, he founded Jamiat al-Dawa Islamiyah, the Islamic call to Islam. And
wait, Buff, we can get into the history stuff at another time. What I want to do is demonstrate to people how the last years of turmoil that he was in led to where we are now, because it's not just the previous administrations on their own. It was the United Nations that had put Gaddafi in a box, and by what did they
you can't forget Pan Am 103,
right? Well,
really, which is the pivotal issue.
Well, go on
in terms of why Gaddafi was taken out.
Please explain that to the audience, because what I want to show is, it was the United Nations that had suspended Libya from the UN Human Rights Council, right? And then they called them to the International Criminal Court, which has no authority over any nation unless you allow it. And they issued warrants for Gaddafi, because right now in Libya, what we have is, we have two Libyas. We have the whole nation of Libya under the control of General Haftar and the Libyan people. And then we have Tripoli that is owned and operated by the United Nations, the same ones that helped the Obama administration topple and trample all over Libya. So would you explain how it kicked off with the Pan Am, what you had seen, how Gaddafi was on a personal level, right? At that time, I mean, he was a visionary looking to the West, looking to modernize the nations around him. And here they are, the United Nations, quashing him like a bug. Obviously, he wanted the gold standard. He didn't want a fiat currency and all these things, right? That came into play too. But his complaint was that he was trying to bring light to the African continent. And this is why he created this Pan-African thing. He was actually a guy that was trying to create peace by way of commerce, because that is how you create peace between nations. It's not like, okay, we're going to be friends now. It's like, let's all be trading together. This is how you squash old wars, by saying, well, we are trading and we're making money and our people are happy. So maybe we should just bury the hatchet for now. And that is something that President Trump most recently, executed, Serbia, Kosovo, the whole, issue in that Balkan bloc was done through, economic agreement. And this is what we're seeing in the Middle East now. So this is where I wanted to bring it to what was happening that you had seen yourself, and how you experienced Gaddafi right before they took him out, and what happened during that time. So people understand just how, again, back to the core, and the point of this whole, show today is to amplify, and for people to understand that it was the previous government that had maintained and supported covertly and in the shadows the only faction of Islam that causes instability, that is thriving. Not to say that the Shia shouldn't exist, don't get me wrong, but if you're empowering them with weapons and the ability to covertly act against against the Sunnis, smack in the middle, that causes instability. So basically what the Obama administration was great at was perpetuating instability in the Middle Eastern region. But I wanted to take
and seeing divide and rule,
right,
as more than a tactic,
right?
And so finding those who could continue, the divisions, both sides. He toyed with both sides, and so have all the presidents who had anything to do with the Middle East. And it does go back to Thomas Jefferson once again, but we won't get into that.
Well, I wanted you to talk
Pan Am
about
103 is an issue dear to my heart, because I was in Libya during that period, and I left Libya on the day of Pan Am 103. And I'm telling you, I have an uncanny parallel relation and situation with that event. Pan Am 103 is was a plane packed with people that was taken down over Lockerbie, Scotland, and I was, I think, scheduled to actually be on that flight, and I was put on another flight. And I was given a briefcase that matched exactly the briefcase that was supposed to contain the explosives for Pan Am 103. My briefcase had security tape around it, all around it, in both directions, or horizontally and vertically, if you set the briefcase up. And I to this day I can't understand exactly why I was given my briefcase back after a fairly long stay in Libya that had these security tapes on it. But it was a Samsonite briefcase that is identical to the briefcase that was used in Pan Am 103.
Just to clarify, so the briefcase you were given with, kind of like a diplomatic briefcase, because, people that have done private contracting work do get these briefcases, right?
Yeah.
So you were given
this was the briefcase I flew to Libya with. It was taken from me. It was held for this was the period that I was there, not leaving and coming back, leaving and coming back, but the extended period that I was there. It was held. It was filled with some documents and books, and it was given back to me on the day of my departure, which was the same day of Pan Am 103. And it was given back to me with all this tape around it in horizontally and vertically, as I mentioned, and it matched exactly. It was the exact same kind of briefcase that was supposedly used by one of the two plotters and hijackers of the plane. Not my plane, but of Pan Am 103.
You were going to be on that plane, right?
You got it. And why did my briefcase match the briefcase that was used, and why all that security tape, and why was I not given the briefcase back? On the day of my departure, that had been taken from me the day of my arrival, and I never saw it during the time I was there. I wanted it because I had research materials and books in it that had to do with what my contract was about. That was a contract with Jamiat al-Dawa Islamiyya, meaning in effect the government of Libya. It started in September of that year, 1988, and so I wanted to bring with me a lot of the materials I used, because I knew I was going to be giving presentations in Libya to university students, a lot of medical students who were my guides. Every time I went to Libya, I had students who were my guides and officials who were my guides and part of Libyan intelligence and so on. Why this briefcase was held and not released to me, which is very strange, because I needed it to do the lectures, to give the presentations, and then given to me with all of this security tape in Arabic, describing that it was a security tape wrapped around it the day of my departure, which turned out to be that day in December when Pan Am 103 was taken down over Lockerbie. There's, I don't know what exactly was going on in the background, but what I do know is that Libyan intelligence was fractured even that early in 1988.
So Buff, let's move on to, right before, tell people how Gaddafi would, sleep, and, these little things that people don't understand, because he was eccentric. Remember, whenever he used to go to these African, meetings, he would wear, more African tradition clothes, right? He was all about just bringing everyone together. So, and he was a very simple man too. He was
he had a mansion that he didn't use, but set up a Bedouin tent in front of it where he slept. You're talking about how he slept and where he slept. Yeah. It was in his Bedouin tent, and this grand, glorious mansion that was housed by many of his officials, and where a lot of meetings, top level meetings, occurred. Here's Muammar, in his tent, and he would hold the most important meetings with heads of nations and very important scientists and others in his tent, drinking camel's milk. And he would eat young camel veal.
It's actually quite tasty. Camel tastes good. It tastes like
ostrich.
I know.
I'm not mocking that.
Yeah, no,
okay?
I'm saying it tastes like ostrich. It's gamey like ostrich. I actually had some of that when I was in Haifa. Actually, I ate camel.
Really?
Yeah, I ate camel in Haifa. So
kangaroo tail is the only unique Australian food I've ever had. Camel's tail.
Yeah, but
I
no,
mean,
no.
I mean,
I
kangaroo
remember.
tail. Excuse me,
I
kangaroo
remember. I
tail.
remember eating it, and I was like, "Well, I didn't know what it was." They ordered the food, right? And I was like, "Oh, this is some good meat." You know, what is it? Is it? It tasted kind of like chicken, but it was gamey chicken. And I was like, "Is this rooster?" And they just all laughed. They were like, "It's camel." I was like, "All right." Uh, so that was the
Yeah,
first time
yeah,
I had
yeah.
camel. I wanted people to understand.
I'm
the
with you on
climate.
Gaddafi,
Yeah,
by the way, and I think that the way that his arrest was so gloriously celebrated on news networks was disgusting. You know, you heads of state shouldn't be presented, to a public, to the American public or any other public, in the manner that that he was presented with his capture, or for that matter, Saddam Hussein's capture, who was ruthless. I wasn't terribly in favor of either of them, although I did like Gaddafi, like you did, for all kinds of reasons.
well,
Saddam. Hussein was
I
a
liked
different
his
matter.
ideas. I liked his ideas, and the fact. I do not know why YouTube is slowing this down when it's completely downloaded. Uh, so I'm going to stop it there. The reason that I played that is because now they're starting to talk about Libya, but I'm going to tell you what we all need to be looking at, and that's Somalia. So Somalia right now, most of the Muslim communities are going through Ramadan. And what's very interesting, is that the Somalis are in a drought. They're having high officials getting killed. Um, ISIS linked Norwegian sisters were arrested after repatriation from Syrian refugee camp. There's fighting between Somali and Afar ethnic groups. There's a new law that they just passed allowing foreigners to buy all kinds of property, right? It is insane, like what you're seeing. Today, President Ruto, he mourned Banisa, the member of parliament, as a dedicated public servant. He, as the head of state and late legislator, he was a leader who was passionate to advocate for Kenyans. Now, let me tell you why Somalia is so important. So, Al Shabaab has their own court system. Al Shabaab, I've talked about this so many times because it's so important. Al Shabaab is a target, and it is a handled group of militants, right? These were all pirates, right? But they're a handled group by the old guard. And so Al Shabaab has their own court system, and they use violent punishments against those who are accused of breaking Al Shabaab laws. It operates a parallel justice system under its own control, and it enforces its own interpretation of Sharia law. And a lot of people in Somalia use the Al Shabaab system to prosecute and punish individuals who are accused of crimes ranging anything from theft to adultery. So if it's women, obviously they're stoned to death. If you're a thief, they cut your hand off. It's pretty. They'll use a machete in the middle of wherever to get it done. Now, Al Shabaab's court system lacks due process protections, and this is an argument and a discussion happening right now in Somalia. The defendants are never provided a lawyer, never the opportunity to present evidence in their defense. Instead, the Al Shabaab courts just rely on confessions, which are often given after they're tortured, right? So they'll accuse a woman of, being indecent or committing adultery, and then they'll all train rape her and then have her admit that she liked it, and then they stone her to death, right? So, there are brutal punishments that they carry out, amputation, public executions, right? Um, and this is a hot topic in Somalia right now, but I'll tell you why it's hot now. Well, Joe Biden just nominated Richard H. Riley, not the same Richard Riley that was governor of South Carolina. That's another guy who was a FSO, a foreign service officer, served in various diplomatic postings throughout his career. He served in Canada, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Iraq. Again, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Iraq. In Canada, he served as the U.S. Consul General for Quebec City for I think a couple years under Clinton. Bush Senior / Clinton. He was responsible for managing a variety of issues in regards to security and investments. Now, here's the good part. In Pakistan, he served as the deputy chief of mission in Islamabad from 95 to 98 under Clinton. That is a period of time that Barack Hussein Obama was in Karachi. So that's interesting. But anyway, during this time, he helped manage how the U.S. was responding to nuclear tests that Pakistan was doing. And I think I've mentioned this before. And even on that interview with Buff Perry, how, one day people woke up and there it is, India and freaking Pakistan are shooting missiles at each other, right? So, what's fascinating is that he was there during that time. Now in Afghanistan, get this, right as the war in Afghanistan started way earlier than what people know. And I had run into Riley when he was U.S. ambassador in Afghanistan. I believe it was 2003. And he actually served between 2002, 2003. And that was during the, the first 9/11 terrorist attacks. We're going to go in and we're going to get him, kind of thing. And so what's weird is that, in Yemen, he also served as ambassador right after that, up until 2007. So I'm trying to point out people that enter to create issues. In Iraq, mind you, Riley served as the coordinator for the economic transition in Baghdad for a year. He was responsible for overseeing how the U.S. was implementing money to support economic development and reconstruction of the country following our entry point, allegedly, in 2003. Now, he's had weird ass postings, right? He is not a very good guy. And he's just been nominated. And this is a guy that has promoted, I repeat, promoted horrific things on foreign lands. We should be watching Somalia, because if he's being nominated for Somalia, that's where you need to be paying attention, because the Horn of Africa is hot right now. And they are this radical portion of the continent that can disrupt everything that's going on within the Middle East and the North African nations. So it's imperative that we keep our eyes open and that we understand how they operate. And how they operate is by seeing who they put in there. This is a huge deal. So this is a very big deal. Extremely big deal. Now, moving along in horrific things, I don't know if you guys heard about it, but in Mexico, there was a migrant center in Ciudad Juarez, right? And 38 people died. And apparently they caught the officers running out of the facility while people who were imprisoned or in, restraint were being burned alive. That's pretty insane. That is extremely concerning. And all these people were just set on fire. This is not a good thing. Very not a good thing. Not a good thing. And, no one is really talking about it. They're saying that people set the mattresses on fire because they knew they were getting deported. But then there's reports that there was a circuit short. My gosh, those guards left those people in there to burn alive, women and men between the ages of 19 and 44. That is horrific. That these guards actually let it happen. They died. They died. And it's terrible. Now, speaking of Mexico, here we are. Joe Biden is like, oh, I don't like oil. But here he is auctioning off a portion of our maritime territory in the Gulf of Mexico for oil drilling. So we're auctioning it off and asking any country, hey, you want to buy this spot so you could drill some oil? Why? So they can cause a natural disaster and blame it on the other nation. But of course. So this area that they're auctioning off is the size a little bit smaller than the size of the country of Italy. And while environmental groups are saying that, oil drilling in the area could cause harm to marine life and exacerbate climate change, he put it on auction. So how is he pushing? He's pushing for less reliance on fossil fuels and transitioning into energy sources, but he's also auctioning off on his own accord, a portion of our waters for a foreign nation to drill on. I want you to think of it, because this is where they come in. They sit down to drill oil. They pay us because they're drilling the oil, right? And then there's an oil spill, and then it's uninhabitable. Then they've taken out your waters and your shore, and it's game over. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to see the writing on the wall. In the meantime, right, we have this guy named Rafael Grossi, who's an Argentinian diplomat, who's the director general of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. I've talked about that agency before. And he has had various positions in the Argentine government, including Secretary for Political Affairs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, he's urging that Russia and, Ukraine decide that the nuclear plant that they have there is protected and that nobody throws any bombs around it, which is really bizarre. I'm pointing this out because I've talked about Argentina and their areas of energy. We need not delve into it as of yet, but it is important to explain and notate, to explain. The reason why I'm pointing this out is because he went through the SEP program at Columbia University. Now, that is a pretty big deal. I mean, someone will be like, no, it's not. He's just continuing his education. Well, just so you know, this guy had gotten his poli-sci degree in Buenos Aires. He's got his master's degree from the University of Geneva in Switzerland. And then he did his SEP at Columbia University. So that's actually quite interesting. Before we move into this bill about TikTok that everyone's losing their mind over, and rightly so, I want to also mention that, did you hear about the mysterious human remains that were discovered at Lake Mead after it started shrinking? Well, it's something of a very thrilling adventure. Apparently, the lake started to shrink due to severe drought, right? And so the level started to drop. It's like the lake was trying to tell us a secret. After being submerged for over 50 years, the remains of a man who was lost for, 20 since 1970 were found. He was 20 years old when he disappeared. And now they found him. So that was interesting because they ID'd a guy who was there and was lost. In 1970, a guy named Joe Jones went missing at the age of 20. Nobody knows why he died, but they're hoping that the discovery of the remains will provide some closure for his family after these years. Well, maybe we can get more than just closure, right? Maybe we can find out what happened, right? I think that would be interesting. Now, we're going to break, and I'm going to shut down all the other feeds and keep it on Rumble so that way I can play musica. But before we do, I wanted to share a video. Thank you, Vincent. I wanted to share a video of just something that was on TikTok that was quite fascinating. I mean, I guess the words were fascinating, and I thought I would share that. Let me get that for you. Let me upload it while I disconnect. You can come to Rumble, to Tori Says. We're live. I'm going to play this clip, disconnect the feeds from, the social media companies that like to disconnect people when they speak truth, because we're going to talk about this bill. And we'll continue from there after I play a really amazing mashup of the Bee Gees and AC/DC, of course. Now take a listen to this while I disconnect. So those of you on other platforms, hop on over to Rumble. And thank you everyone for the Rumble rants, the stickers, everything. Here we go.
Hi, I'm from outer space. I got Milky Way for blood, evolution in my veins. I'm gone, I've been far away. I'm illuminated now, make a move, start a waves. I've been dreaming about flying for a long time. I had a vision from the birds, they want a cosign. Yeah, artificially intelligent AI. I'm your future, past and present, I'm a fine line. Yeah, I'm a missing link of this illusion. I am not really here, I'm an intrusion. I don't swim or sink, I just float. I don't need gravity, I just need growth. Oh, when I move, it's an earthquake rumble. I won't ever ever fall, never stumble. And I don't need to be humble. Break down walls like Jericho crumble.